I never thought a party game would change everything I thought I knew about my roommate Gabriel. But sometimes the most unexpected moments become the ones that matter most. If this story hits close to home, drop a red heart in the comments below. The bass thumped through our small apartment as bodies pressed together in our makeshift living room dance floor. I nursed my third beer of the night, watching Gabriel laugh with his usual crowd of friends near the kitchen counter. Even in the dim lighting, his smile was magnetic, the kind that drew people in without him even trying. I'd been living with this feeling for months now, this constant awareness of him that I kept telling myself was just misplaced friendship. Truth or dare? Someone shouted over the music, and suddenly everyone was gathering in a circle on our worn carpet. I found myself sitting directly across from Gabriel, which felt like both a blessing and a curse. His dark hair was slightly messed up from the heat of the party, and when he caught my eye, he flashed me that easy grin that always made my stomach flip. Connor, Gabriel's friend from his business classes, was clearly already drunk as he spun an empty bottle in the center of our circle. "All right, let's make this interesting," he announced with a mischievous glint in his eyes. The bottle spun lazily before landing on Gabriel, who groaned dramatically. "Truth or dare, my man?" Connor asked, but there was something in his tone that made me pay closer attention. A kind of knowing smirk that suggested this wasn't as random as it appeared. Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, considering. "Dare," he said finally, and I could see the slight tension in his shoulders even as he tried to appear relaxed. Connor's grin widened. "I dare you to kiss Carter." The room erupted in cheers and laughter, but all I could hear was the sudden rushing of blood in my ears. My eyes immediately found Gabriel's across the circle, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. I expected him to laugh it off, maybe suggest spinning the bottle again, or choose truth instead. But something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, maybe, or was it something else entirely? "Come on, don't be a coward," someone shouted from behind me, and suddenly everyone was chanting and clapping. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, mortified that I was being put in this position. Gabriel and I were roommates, friends. He had a girlfriend, for crying out loud. Emma from his psychology class, who he'd been dating for 3 months and who called him every night before bed. But Gabriel was already moving, unfolding his long legs and crossing the small circle toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs as he knelt in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with beer and something uniquely him. "Sorry about this," he murmured, low enough that only I could hear him over the cheering crowd. But when I looked into his eyes, I didn't see apology there. I saw something deeper, more complex, like he was asking me a question I didn't know how to answer. I expected it to be quick. A brief peck to satisfy the crowd, maybe a laugh afterward to break the tension. Just friends being good sports about a stupid party dare. But when Gabriel's lips touched mine, something shifted in the air between us. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like he was testing the waters. But then his hand came up to cup the side of my face, his thumb brushing against my cheekbone, and suddenly the kiss deepened. My eyes fluttered closed, and for a moment, I forgot about the cheering crowd, forgot about Emma, forgot about everything except the warm press of his mouth against mine and the way his breath hitched when I kissed him back. It lasted far longer than any dare required. Long enough that the initial whoops and hollers from our friends started to die down, replaced by a kind of surprised silence. Long enough that I began to wonder if Gabriel had forgotten where we were, forgotten that this was supposed to be just for show. When he finally pulled back, his face was flushed, his breathing slightly uneven. But he didn't immediately move away from me. Instead, he stayed kneeling there, his hand still resting against my cheek, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my chest tight. "Well, damn," Connor said, breaking the spell, and nervous laughter rippled through the group. That was more than I bargained for. Gabriel's hand dropped from my face, and he rocked back on his heels, but his gaze never left mine. There was something raw in his expression, something vulnerable that I'd never seen before. Like the kiss had stripped away some carefully constructed facade and left him exposed. "Your turn to spin," he said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. But instead of returning to his spot across the circle, he settled beside me, close enough that our thighs pressed together, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. The game continued around us, but I was barely aware of it. My lips still tingled from the kiss, and I kept replaying those moments in my head. The way Gabriel had touched my face so gently, like I was something precious. The way he'd kissed me back when I responded, like he'd forgotten it was supposed to be pretend. The way he was sitting so close to me now, his shoulder brushing mine every time he laughed at someone else's dare. I snuck glances at him throughout the rest of the game, trying to gauge his reaction, trying to understand what had just happened between us. But Gabriel seemed determined to act normal, joking with his friends and cheering on the increasingly ridiculous dares. The only sign that the kiss had affected him at all was the way he kept absently touching his lips, like he was trying to chase the memory of the sensation. As the party wound down and people started to leave, I found myself helping clean up while Gabriel walked the last few stragglers to the door. When Connor left, I noticed him clap Gabriel on the shoulder and say something that made Gabriel's jaw tighten. Whatever it was, Gabriel just shook his head and closed the door firmly behind him. The apartment felt impossibly quiet after hours of music and laughter. Gabriel and I moved around each other in our familiar cleaning routine, but there was a new tension in the air, a charged silence that made every accidental brush of our hands feel electric. "That was fun," Gabriel said finally, his voice carefully casual as he loaded empty bottles into a trash bag. But he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I wanted to ask him about the kiss, wanted to understand why it had felt like so much more than a dare. But something held me back, maybe fear, maybe the knowledge that whatever had happened between us was too fragile to examine too closely. The morning after the party, I woke up with Gabriel's kiss still burning on my lips and the weight of 6 months' worth of lies pressing down on my chest. I'd been living a carefully constructed deception since the day I moved in with him, convincing myself that my growing feelings were just misplaced attraction, that I could keep my sexuality hidden and everything would be fine. But lying there in my bed, listening to Gabriel moving around in the kitchen, I realized how exhausting it had become to pretend I was someone I wasn't. I'd known I was gay since high school, but coming to college had felt like a chance to reinvent myself. When I'd answered Gabriel's roommate ad 6 months ago, I'd walked into our apartment and immediately felt that familiar flutter of attraction. He was everything I'd always been drawn to, tall, with dark hair that fell across his forehead when he concentrated, and these warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through me. But within the first week, it became clear that Gabriel was straight. He talked about girls constantly, had photos with various girlfriends from high school scattered around his room, and by the second month, he'd started dating Emma from his psychology class. So I'd buried my feelings deep and played the part of the perfectly straight roommate. I dated a few girls casually, nothing serious, just enough to maintain the facade. I laughed along when Gabriel talked about women, offered advice about his relationship with Emma, and pretended that watching him with her didn't feel like swallowing glass. I convinced myself that what I felt for him was just appreciation for his friendship, that the way my pulse quickened when he walked around shirtless was normal roommate awkwardness, that the ache in my chest when he kissed Emma goodnight was just indigestion. But the truth was, I'd been falling for Gabriel Mitchell since the day we met, and last night's kiss had shattered every wall I'd built to keep those feelings contained. I finally dragged myself out of bed and found Gabriel at the kitchen counter, nursing a cup of coffee and staring out the window with an expression I couldn't read. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes, the same intensity I'd seen right after our kiss, before he quickly looked away. "Morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Coffee's fresh." "Thanks." I poured myself a cup, hyper-aware of the space between us, of how he seemed to be deliberately avoiding looking at me directly. "How's your head?" "Fine. Didn't drink that much." He paused, then added, "You?" "I'm good." The lie came easily, even though I felt anything but good. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and last night had given me a glimpse of what it might feel like to jump. We fell into an awkward silence, both of us apparently fascinated by our coffee cups. This was new territory for us. Usually, our mornings were easy and comfortable, filled with casual conversation about classes or weekend plans. Gabriel would tease me about my bedhead, and I'd make fun of his obsession with adding too much sugar to his coffee. But now there was this tension between us, thick and uncomfortable, like we were both afraid to acknowledge what had happened. So, Gabriel said finally, clearing his throat, "Crazy party last night." Yeah, Connor really went all out. He did. Another pause. That game got pretty wild. I looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of what he was thinking. Yeah, it did. But Gabriel had already turned away, rinsing his mug in the sink with more attention than the task required. I should get going. Meeting Emma for brunch. The mention of Emma's name hit me like a physical blow, even though I should have expected it. Of course he was seeing Emma. Of course last night hadn't changed anything for him. It had been a dare, nothing more, and I was an idiot for reading anything deeper into it. Right, I managed. Have fun. Gabriel nodded and headed toward his room, but he paused in the doorway, looking back at me with that same unreadable expression. For a moment, I thought he might say something about the kiss, might acknowledge the way it had felt different from what either of us had expected. But instead, he just said, "See you later," and disappeared down the hall. I spent the rest of the morning trying to distract myself with homework, but my mind kept wandering back to the way Gabriel's lips had felt against mine, the way his hand had lingered on my face, the way he'd looked at me afterward like he was seeing me for the first time. I told myself I was imagining things, that the alcohol and the excitement of the party had made everything seem more significant than it was. Gabriel was straight. He had a girlfriend. The kiss had been a dare, nothing more. But even as I tried to convince myself of that, I couldn't shake the memory of how long he'd stayed close to me afterward, how his eyes had kept finding mine across the room for the rest of the night. When Gabriel came home that evening, he seemed different somehow, quieter. He usually came back from dates with Emma full of stories about where they'd gone and what they'd done, but tonight he just mumbled a quick hello and headed straight to his room. I heard him on the phone later, his voice low and tense, though I couldn't make out the words. The next few days fell into a strange pattern. Gabriel seemed to be avoiding me, leaving early for classes and coming home late, spending more time at the library than usual. When we did cross paths, our interactions were polite but stilted, like we were strangers sharing an apartment rather than friends who had been living together for 6 months. I missed our easy conversations, our late-night study sessions, the comfortable companionship that had developed between us. But I also couldn't bring myself to address what had happened, afraid that talking about it would only make things more awkward between us. It was Thursday night when I first noticed something was really off. Gabriel had been on the phone with Emma, and even through his closed bedroom door, I could hear the tension in his voice. Their conversation seemed to be getting more heated, though I couldn't make out specific words. When it ended, there was silence for a long moment, and then I heard what sounded like Gabriel throwing something against the wall. I knocked softly on his door. "Everything okay?" "Fine," came his muffled response, but his voice sounded strained. "Gabriel, if you want to talk." I said, "I'm fine, Carter." The sharpness in his tone stung, but I backed off. We weren't in a place where I could push him to open up, not when we were both still pretending that Saturday night hadn't happened. Friday brought another shift. Gabriel emerged from his room looking tired and distracted, but when I asked if he was all right, he actually paused and looked at me directly for the first time since the party. "Just relationship stuff," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Nothing I can't handle." "Emma giving you trouble?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Something like that." I wanted to ask more, wanted to offer support the way I would have before everything got complicated between us. But I wasn't sure where we stood anymore, wasn't sure if I had the right to pry into his relationship problems when I was harboring feelings that made my concern anything but innocent. That night, I was up late working on a paper when I heard Gabriel come home. He'd been out with friends, and I'd expected him to go straight to bed, but instead, he appeared in the living room doorway, leaning against the frame and watching me work. "You're up late," he said. "Paper's due tomorrow." I looked up from my laptop, taking in his rumpled appearance, the way his hair was messed up like he'd been running his hands through it. "You okay?" Gabriel moved into the room, settling on the opposite end of the couch from me. There was something different about his energy tonight, less guarded than he'd been all week. "Can I ask you something?" he said. My heart rate picked up. "Sure. Do you think people can change? Like, fundamentally change who they are?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Gabriel was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. "I mean, what if you spent your whole life thinking you knew yourself, thinking you had everything figured out, and then something happened that made you question all of it?" I set my laptop aside, giving him my full attention. This felt important, like he was trying to tell me something without actually saying it. "I think people can discover things about themselves they didn't know before. That doesn't mean they're changing, necessarily. Maybe they're just finally being honest about who they've always been." Gabriel's eyes met mine, and for a moment, the air between us felt charged with the same electricity I'd felt during our kiss. "What if being honest means losing everything you thought you wanted? Then maybe what you thought you wanted wasn't right for you to begin with." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. I could feel Gabriel watching me, could sense him wrestling with something he couldn't quite bring himself to say. Part of me wanted to push, to ask him directly what was going on with Emma, what had really happened during that kiss. But another part of me was terrified of the answer, afraid that forcing the conversation would destroy whatever fragile thing was building between us. Finally, Gabriel stood up, pausing beside the couch. "Thanks, Carter, for listening. Anytime." He started to walk away, then turned back. "That night at the party, I want you to know it wasn't just about the dare." Before I could respond, before I could even process what he'd just said, he was gone, leaving me alone with my racing heart and the sudden, impossible hope that maybe I hadn't been imagining things after all. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and something that might have been pancakes, though with Gabriel's cooking skills, it could just as easily have been cardboard soaked in syrup. I padded to the kitchen in my boxers and an old t-shirt, still half asleep, only to find Gabriel standing at the stove with his back to me, wearing nothing but pajama pants that hung low on his hips. "Morning," he said without turning around, and I could hear something different in his voice. Softer, maybe, less guarded than it had been in days. "You're up early for a Saturday," I managed, trying not to stare at the way his shoulder muscles moved as he flipped what were definitely burnt pancakes. "Couldn't sleep." He glanced over his shoulder at me, and our eyes met for just a second before he turned back to the stove. "Thought I'd make breakfast. You know, as an apology for being weird all week." I leaned against the doorframe, suddenly very aware of how little either of us was wearing. "You don't need to apologize." "Yeah, I do." He turned off the burner and faced me fully, holding the spatula like some kind of peace offering. "I've been acting like a complete ass, and you don't deserve that." There was something in his expression that made my chest tight. He looked vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before, like he was fighting some internal battle and wasn't sure which side was winning. "Gabriel, I made enough for both of us," he interrupted, gesturing toward the stack of slightly charred pancakes. "If you want." The way he said it, tentative and hopeful, made it clear he was asking for more than just my breakfast preferences. He was asking if we could try to go back to normal, or at least whatever passed for normal between us these days. "Yeah," I said, and his shoulders relaxed visibly. "I'd like that." We ate at the small table by the window, and for the first time in a week, the silence between us didn't feel suffocating. Gabriel had managed to burn the pancakes and undercook them at the same time, which should have been physically impossible, but I ate every bite because he'd made them for me. "So," he said eventually, pushing syrup around his plate with his fork, "I was thinking maybe we could hang out today, like we used to, before everything got." He waved his hand vaguely. "Complicated," I supplied. "Yeah, complicated." He looked up at me then, and there was something in his eyes that made my pulse quicken. "I miss it. Us, I mean. Just being us." The problem was, I wasn't sure we could go back to just being us. Not after that kiss, not after the way things had shifted between us. But looking at Gabriel sitting there in the morning light, his hair messy from sleep and hope written across his face, I knew I'd try. "What did you have in mind?" His smile was the first genuine one I'd seen from him all week. "Remember that hiking trail we talked about checking out? The one near the lake?" I nodded. "We planned to go months ago, Back when I'd first moved in and everything was simpler. Back when I could pretend my feelings for him were just friendship and convince myself that the way he looked at me sometimes didn't mean anything. It's supposed to be nice today, he continued. Warm enough to actually enjoy being outside. Okay, I said, and meant it. Let's do it. 2 hours later, we were driving toward the mountains with the windows down and music playing softly between us. Gabriel was wearing a blue t-shirt that brought out his eyes and made it nearly impossible for me to concentrate on giving directions, and I caught him glancing at me more than necessary when he thought I wasn't looking. The trail was more challenging than we'd expected, winding up through dense forest before opening onto rocky overlooks that gave us glimpses of the valley below. We fell into an easy rhythm, talking about everything and nothing: classes, our friends, Gabriel's ongoing war with our upstairs neighbor who played music too loud. But underneath the familiar conversation, I could feel something electric humming between us. When Gabriel handed me his water bottle, his fingers brushed mine and lingered just a second too long. When I stumbled on a loose rock, his hand shot out to steady me, gripping my arm with more intensity than the situation required. Thanks, I said, very aware that he hadn't let go yet. Anytime, he replied, his voice rough in a way that had nothing to do with the hiking. We reached the summit after about an hour, breathing hard and slightly sweaty. The view was incredible. Miles of forest stretched out below us, broken up by the silver ribbon of the lake and the distant outline of the city we'd left behind. Damn, Gabriel said, pulling his shirt away from his chest to get some air. That was more of a workout than I expected. I made the mistake of looking at him as he said it, at the way his shirt clung to his chest and the flush that colored his cheeks. When he caught me staring, neither of us looked away immediately. Carter, he said quietly, and my name sounded different in his mouth than it used to. Yeah. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something important, then seemed to think better of it. Nothing. Just, thanks for coming with me today. We found a flat rock to sit on and shared the sandwiches Gabriel had packed, falling into comfortable conversation about everything except the tension that seemed to thicken every time our eyes met. But I could feel him watching me when I wasn't looking, could sense the weight of unspoken words in every pause. Emma called this morning, he said eventually, and I felt my stomach drop. Oh, I didn't answer. He was quiet for a moment, picking at the label on his water bottle. I haven't been answering her calls this week. I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet and waited for him to continue. She's been wanting to hang out more, you know? Wanting to make things more serious between us. He glanced at me sideways. But every time she brings it up, I can't. Why not? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Gabriel was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because when I try to imagine a future with her, I can't. And when I try to figure out why. He trailed off, shaking his head. Gabriel, I keep thinking about that night. About the party. He turned to look at me fully, and the intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. I keep thinking about how it felt to kiss you. My heart started pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. How did it feel? Like coming home, he said simply. Like everything I'd been missing without even knowing I was missing it. The words hung between us, loaded with possibility and fear, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. I wanted to reach for him, wanted to close the distance between us on this rock overlooking the world, but I was terrified of moving too fast and scaring him away. I've never felt that way kissing anyone else, he continued, his voice gaining strength. Not Emma, not any of the girls I dated before her. Just you. Gabriel. I know what that probably means, he said quickly, like he needed to get the words out before he lost his nerve. About me, I mean. About what I am. But I'm scared, Carter. I'm scared of what it means and what people will think and how everything will change. I shifted closer to him on the rock, near enough that our knees were almost touching. What people think doesn't matter, doesn't it? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. My parents, my friends from home, everyone who thinks they know who I am. Do you know who you are? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him working through something in his head. I'm starting to, he said finally. And it's terrifying and exciting and completely overwhelming all at the same time. I wanted to tell him that I understood, that I'd been exactly where he was. I wanted to share the story of my own coming out, the fear and confusion and eventual relief of finally accepting who I was. But something told me this wasn't the time for my story. This was Gabriel's moment to figure things out for himself. You don't have to have all the answers right now, I said instead. You can take as much time as you need. What if I want to figure it out with you? The question hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, at the hope and vulnerability written across his face, and felt something shift in my chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that every time I imagine exploring this part of myself, you're there. I'm saying that the thought of doing this alone terrifies me, but the thought of doing it with you. He reached out tentatively, his fingers barely grazing mine. It feels right. I looked down at our hands, at the way his fingers were trembling slightly against mine, and felt my carefully constructed walls start to crumble. I need you to be sure, I said quietly. I need you to be sure because I can't be your experiment, Gabriel. I can't be the guy you kiss to figure out if you're gay and then walk away from when you decide you're not. Is that what you think this is? I don't know what this is. The words came out harsher than I intended, colored by months of hiding and wanting and telling myself I was imagining things. You have a girlfriend. You've spent the last 6 months talking about girls and acting like the straightest guy I know, and now suddenly. It's not sudden. Gabriel's voice was firm, cutting through my rambling. God, Carter, it's not sudden at all. I looked up at him, surprised by the certainty in his tone. I've been feeling this for months, he continued. Every time you walk around the apartment in just a towel, every time you fall asleep on the couch during our movie nights, every time you smile at me like I'm the only person in the room, I've been feeling it. I just didn't know what to do with it. So what changed? That kiss, he said immediately. Kissing you made everything else make sense. All those times I got jealous when you mentioned going on dates. All those excuses I made to touch you or be close to you. The way I've been pulling away from Emma because being with her started feeling like lying. It all makes sense now. He shifted on the rock, so he was facing me fully, his knee pressing against mine. I can't promise I have everything figured out, he said. I can't promise this won't be messy or complicated or scary as hell. But I can promise you that this isn't some experiment for me. What I feel for you, it's real, Carter. It's the most real thing I've ever felt. I stared at him, at the earnestness in his eyes and the way his hand was still touching mine, and felt the last of my defenses crumble. I've been in love with you since about 2 weeks after I moved in, I admitted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I've been pretending to be straight and hiding who I am because I was so terrified you'd figure it out and everything would get weird between us. Gabriel's eyes widened. You've been pretending to be straight? Completely. Those dates I mentioned? Gay guys from dating apps that I met for coffee and never saw again because I couldn't stop thinking about you long enough to give them a real chance. Jesus, Carter. Gabriel ran his free hand through his hair. We've both been lying to each other this whole time. Pretty much, yeah. We sat there for a moment, letting the weight of our mutual confessions settle between us. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, casting everything in golden light that made Gabriel's eyes look like amber. So what now? I asked. Gabriel's answer was to lean closer, his hand sliding up to cup my face. Now I'd really like to kiss you again. Without an audience this time. I barely had time to nod before his lips were on mine, soft and sure and nothing like the desperate, confused kiss from the party. This one was deliberate, a choice rather than a dare, and it tasted like possibility and new beginnings. When we finally broke apart, Gabriel rested his forehead against mine, both of us breathing hard. That was even better than I remembered, he said, his thumb brushing across my cheek. Yeah, and now I want to do it again. So we did, there on that rock overlooking the valley, kissing like we were making up for months of wanting and not having. Gabriel's hands tangled in my hair, and I gripped the front of his shirt, pulling him closer until there was no space left between us. When we finally made it back down the mountain, the sun was setting, and we couldn't seem to stop touching each other. Gabriel's hand found mine on the walk back to the car, our fingers intertwining like they belonged that way. He kept looking over at me with this amazed expression, like he couldn't quite believe what was happening between us. "I need to break up with Emma," he said as we drove home, his free hand resting on my thigh in a way that made it hard to concentrate on the road. "Are you sure? I should have done it weeks ago. It's not fair to her, keeping her in a relationship when my heart is completely somewhere else." He squeezed my leg gently. "With someone else." The drive home felt both endless and too short. I wanted to stay in this bubble we'd created, where everything was new and perfect and nothing could complicate what was happening between us. But I also couldn't wait to get Gabriel alone, to explore this thing between us without the possibility of other hikers stumbling upon us. "Carter," Gabriel said as we pulled into our parking spot. "Yeah. Whatever happens next, however we figure this out, I want you to know that today was perfect. You're perfect." I turned off the engine and looked at him, at the way the streetlight caught in his hair and the soft smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's not going to be easy," I said. "Figuring this out, I mean. There's going to be a lot to work through." "I know." He leaned over the center console and kissed me softly, sweetly. "But I want to work through it with you. All of it." As we walked up to our apartment, Gabriel's arm around my shoulders and my heart full of hope I'd been afraid to feel, I couldn't help but think that maybe all those months of hiding and wanting and pretending had been worth it to get to this moment. The morning after our hike felt different. I woke up to find Gabriel already dressed, sitting at our small kitchen table with his laptop open and his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was quiet, measured in that way that meant he was trying to stay calm. "I know, Emma. I know we had plans, but I really need some space right now to figure things out." There was a long pause, and I could hear her voice through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. "It's not about you doing anything wrong. It's about me needing to understand some things about myself." I froze in the doorway, unsure whether to retreat to my room or continue to the coffee maker. Gabriel caught my eye and gave me a small, strained smile before turning his attention back to the call. "Look, can we talk about this later? I've got a lot of studying to do today." Another pause. "Okay. Yeah. Talk soon." He hung up and immediately buried his face in his hands, letting out a long sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Everything okay?" I asked, though we both knew it wasn't. "Emma wants to come over today. She says we haven't spent enough time together lately, and she misses me." Gabriel looked up at me, and I could see the conflict written across his features. I told her I needed space, but you know Emma. She doesn't really take no for an answer. I didn't know Emma. She was the kind of person who believed that love could solve any problem, that if she just tried hard enough, showed enough affection, everything would work out. It was one of the things that had always made me feel slightly guilty about my feelings for Gabriel. She was genuinely a good person who cared about him. "Maybe you should see her," I said, though the words felt like glass in my throat. "Talk things through." Gabriel's expression was unreadable. "Yeah, maybe." But even as he said it, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands fidgeted with his coffee mug. This was not the reaction of someone looking forward to spending time with their girlfriend. 3 hours later, Emma knocked on our door with her bright smile and an armload of Gabriel's favorite snacks. She'd clearly put effort into her appearance. Her dark hair was curled perfectly, and she was wearing the sundress Gabriel had once mentioned looked good on her. "Surprise," she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss Gabriel's cheek as he opened the door. I watched from the couch as he accepted the kiss but didn't lean into it, didn't put his arms around her the way he used to. "Hey, Em. I thought we were going to talk on the phone later." "I know, but I missed you, and I thought it would be better to talk in person." She breezed past him into our living room, setting her bags on the coffee table. "Hi, Carter. Hope you don't mind me stealing your roommate for a few hours." "Not at all," I lied, closing my textbook and preparing to retreat to my room. "Actually, you don't have to leave," Gabriel said quickly, and something in his tone made both Emma and me look at him sharply. "I mean, we're all friends here, right?" Emma's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course. Though I was hoping we could have some alone time, babe. It feels like it's been forever since it was just the two of us." I watched Gabriel's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Right? Yeah, okay." They settled on the couch together, and I made myself busy in the kitchen, trying not to watch but unable to help myself. Emma curled up against Gabriel's side, her hand resting on his chest, but his body language was all wrong. His arm around her seemed forced, and he kept glancing toward the kitchen where I was pretending to organize our already organized cabinets. So, Emma said, her voice taking on that careful tone people use when they're about to address something serious. You've seemed kind of distant lately. Is everything okay? Are you stressed about classes? Or work? Just, yeah, school stuff, Gabriel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Emma shifted so she could look at his face. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? We've been together for 8 months, Gabe. I love you. The words hung in the air, and I saw Gabriel's entire body tense. It wasn't the first time Emma had said she loved him, but something about this moment felt different, more weighted. I know you do, Gabriel said quietly, but he didn't say it back. Emma's face fell slightly. You didn't say it back. Emma, you haven't said it back in weeks, actually. Not since that night we went to dinner with my parents. Her voice was getting smaller, more uncertain. Did I do something wrong? Are you upset with me? I felt like I was intruding on something private, but Gabriel had asked me to stay, and now I was trapped in the kitchen, witnessing this painful conversation unfold. You didn't do anything wrong, Gabriel said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. You're amazing, Em. You're kind and smart and beautiful, and you deserve someone who can love you the way you deserve to be loved. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Emma pulled back from him, her eyes wide. What are you saying? Gabriel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his way of dealing with stress and frustration. I'm saying that I care about you so much, but I don't think I can give you what you need, what you want. But I only want you, Emma said, and there was a desperate edge to her voice now. We're good together, Gabe. We are. And if there's something we need to work on, we can work on it. Whatever it is. It's not something we can work on, Gabriel said gently, but firmly. It's not about you, Emma. It's about me. I need to figure some things out about myself, and it's not fair to keep you waiting while I do that. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Are you breaking up with me? The silence stretched on so long that I found myself holding my breath. Finally, Gabriel spoke. Yeah, I think I am. Emma's sharp intake of breath was audible from the kitchen. Is there someone else? Another long pause. It's complicated. That's not an answer, Gabriel. There isn't another girl, if that's what you're asking. Emma studied his face, and I could almost see her trying to piece together what he wasn't saying. Then what is it? What's so complicated that you have to throw away 8 months together? Gabriel looked toward the kitchen, and for a moment, our eyes met. I saw something desperate there, like he was drowning and couldn't figure out how to ask for help. I just need to figure out who I am, he said finally. And I can't do that while I'm with you. It's not fair to either of us. Emma started crying then, not dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that somehow seemed worse. I don't understand. I thought we were happy. I thought you were happy. I thought I was too, Gabriel said, and there was so much pain in his voice that it made my chest ache. But I haven't been. Not really. And you deserve to be with someone who is genuinely, completely happy to be with you. They sat in silence for several minutes, Emma crying softly while Gabriel stared at his hands. Finally, she stood up, gathering her purse and leaving the snacks on the coffee table. I hope you figure out whatever it is you're looking for, she said, and despite her tears, there was dignity in her voice. I really do. Because you're throwing away something real for something you can't even name. After she left, Gabriel sat on the couch staring at the closed door for a long time. I stayed in the kitchen, unsure of what to say or do. The apartment felt heavy with the weight of what had just happened. You can come out of the kitchen now, Gabriel said eventually. I know you heard everything. I walked back to the living room and sat in the chair across from him, maintaining some distance. Are you okay? Gabriel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Am I okay? I just broke up with a girl who loves me, who I care about, because I can't figure out what the hell is wrong with me. So no, I'm not okay. There's nothing wrong with you, I said quietly. Isn't there? Gabriel looked at me then, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Normal guys don't break up with amazing girlfriends because they can't stop thinking about their male roommates. Normal guys don't spend months pretending to be something they're not. My heart stopped. Gabriel, don't, he said, holding up a hand. Don't say whatever you're about to say. I can see it in your face. That look like you want to fix this, like you want to make it better. But you can't, Carter. You can't fix whatever's broken in me. What if nothing's broken? I asked, leaning forward. What if you're just figuring out something about yourself that you never had to confront before? Gabriel shook his head. You don't understand. You've probably always known who you were, what you wanted. I've spent 21 years thinking I had it figured out, and now I don't know anything. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I wanted to tell him about my own journey of self-discovery, about the years of confusion and denial I'd gone through. But something in his expression told me he wasn't ready to hear it. Maybe not knowing is okay for now, I said instead. Maybe you don't have to have it all figured out right away. But I heard Emma, Gabriel said, his voice breaking slightly. I heard her because I'm too much of a coward to face whatever this is. She deserves better than that. You ended things instead of stringing her along. That took courage, not cowardice. Gabriel was quiet for a moment, considering this. She asked if there was someone else. What did you tell her? That it was complicated. He looked at me again, and this time I didn't look away. Is it complicated? The question hung between us, loaded with everything we hadn't said, everything we'd been dancing around for months. I thought about lying, about protecting us both from the truth, but I was tired of pretending. Yeah, I said softly. It is. Gabriel nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. I need some time to think, to figure out what any of this means. Okay. I'm not saying I regret yesterday, he said quickly. The hike, what we talked about, what happened between us. I don't regret any of that, but I also don't know what to do with it. I understood. The space between questioning and knowing was difficult territory to navigate, especially when someone else's feelings were involved. Take whatever time you need, I said. I'm not going anywhere. Gabriel smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. Thank you. For understanding. For not pushing. That night, I lay in bed listening to Gabriel move around the apartment. I heard him on the phone with his sister, talking in low tones about his breakup with Emma. I heard him making late-night snacks, pacing the living room, clearly too restless to sleep. Around 2 in the morning, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. Carter? Are you awake? I opened the door to find Gabriel standing in the hallway in his pajamas, looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. Can't sleep either? I asked. He shook his head. I keep thinking about what Emma said. About throwing away something real for something I can't even name. Do you think that's what you did? Gabriel considered this. No. What Emma and I had was comfortable, familiar. But it wasn't real, not really. Not when I was pretending to be someone I'm not. He paused. The thing is, I don't even know who I really am yet. And that's terrifying. It doesn't have to be, I said. Figuring yourself out. It's not something you have to do alone. Gabriel looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with something. What if I figure it out, and it changes everything between us? What if I'm not who you think I am? What if you are exactly who I think you are? And that's why this scares you so much. The question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He stared at me for several seconds, his breathing slightly uneven. I should let you get some sleep, he said finally, but he didn't move. Gabriel, I said quietly, whatever you figure out about yourself, whatever you decide you want or need, it's not going to change how I feel about you as a person. You're my friend first, and that's not going anywhere. He nodded, but I could see the doubt still lingering in his eyes. What if being friends isn't enough anymore? The question caught me off guard with its honesty. Then we'll figure that out too, when you're ready. Gabriel smiled, a real smile this time, soft and grateful. I don't know what I did to deserve a friend like you. As he turned to go back to his room, I felt the weight of everything unsaid between us. The breakup with Emma had been necessary, but it had also made our situation more real, more immediate. Gabriel was free now to explore whatever he was feeling, but that freedom came with its own set of complications and fears. I closed my door and returned to bed, but sleep remained elusive. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the look in Gabriel's eyes when he'd asked if being friends would be enough. Because the truth was, I didn't know if it would be enough. He opened his eyes, and I saw wonder there, mixed with something that looked like relief. I've been wanting to do that for so long. Just that. A flush crept up his neck. Not just that. The admission hung between us, heavy with implication. I felt heat pool in my stomach, but I forced myself to think clearly. Gabriel was just beginning to explore this side of himself. The last thing I wanted was to rush him into something he wasn't ready for. We should probably get up, I said, even though every part of me wanted to stay in this bed with him forever. Finals aren't going to take themselves. Gabriel groaned and buried his face in my shoulder. I completely forgot about finals. How am I supposed to concentrate on organic chemistry when all I can think about is kissing you? I laughed, running my fingers through his hair. You'll manage. You're brilliant, remember? I don't feel brilliant right now. I feel like my entire world just got turned upside down. In a good way? He lifted his head to look at me, and the smile that spread across his face was radiant. In the best way. We eventually forced ourselves to get up and shower, separately, though the look Gabriel gave me suggested he'd considered other options. Over breakfast, we talked about what this meant, what we wanted, what scared us. Gabriel admitted he was nervous about people finding out, not because he was ashamed, but because he wasn't sure how to handle the questions and assumptions that would come. I don't want to hide this, he said, stirring his coffee absently. But I also don't want to feel like I have to defend or explain it to everyone who asks. We don't have to tell anyone until you're ready, I assured him. This is about us, not them. What about your friends? Jake and Marcus. I considered this. Jake and Marcus had known I was gay since freshman year, and they'd been surprisingly cool about it. But they'd also made comments about Gabriel being obviously straight, had teased me about my hopeless crush on my straight roommate. They'll be surprised, I admitted. But they'll be happy for us. For me. They know how much you mean to me. Gabriel reached across the table and took my hand, threading our fingers together. You mean everything to me, Carter. I want you to know that. This isn't some experiment or phase. What I feel for you. It's real. The sincerity in his voice made my chest tight with emotion. I know. I feel it too. I keep thinking about last night, when you said you were planning to move out. His grip on my hand tightened. The thought of losing you, of not having you in my life, it made me realize I'd rather risk everything than keep living this lie. You're not going to lose me, I promised. Even if this doesn't work out the way we hope, you're not going to lose me. It will work out. His certainty surprised me. It has to. I can't go back to pretending I don't feel this way about you. Looking at him across our small kitchen table, his hair still messy from sleep, his eyes bright with hope and determination, I felt something settle in my chest. For months, I'd been convinced that my feelings for Gabriel were hopeless, that I was setting myself up for heartbreak by staying in this apartment, in this friendship that could never be more. But sitting here with his hand in mine, remembering the way he'd kissed me like I was something precious, I realized I'd been wrong about so many things. Wrong about his feelings, wrong about his sexuality, wrong about the impossibility of us. I love you, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Gabriel's eyes widened, and for a moment I panicked, thinking I'd moved too fast, said too much. But then his face broke into a smile so brilliant it took my breath away. I love you too, he said. I've been wanting to say that for months. We spent the rest of the morning studying together, but it was nearly impossible to concentrate. Every time Gabriel looked at me, every accidental brush of our hands, every shared smile sent electricity racing through me. This was dangerous territory. Finals week was not the time to be distracted by new relationship butterflies. But I couldn't bring myself to care. After months of longing and uncertainty, I've convinced myself that Gabriel could never feel the same way. Having him here beside me, openly affectionate and obviously smitten, felt like a miracle. Okay, Gabriel said around noon, closing his textbook with a decisive snap. I can't focus on molecular structures when you keep looking at me like that. Like what? Like you want to kiss me again. I grinned. Maybe I do. Maybe I want you to. So I did. The next few weeks passed in a careful dance of discovery. We agreed to take things slow. Gabriel needed time to process everything he was feeling, and honestly, I needed time to believe this was really happening. After months of thinking my feelings were hopeless, the shift felt surreal. We established some ground rules. No pressure, complete honesty, and our friendship came first. Gabriel was still figuring out his sexuality, and I wasn't going to rush him through the journey. Some days were easier than others. There were moments when everything felt natural, when Gabriel would lean against me while we watched movies, or when our hands would brush and neither of us would pull away. Other days, I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the way he'd catch himself staring at me and look confused by his own reaction. I keep waiting for it to feel wrong, he admitted one night as we sat on our couch, a careful space between us. Everyone always talks about how you just know, right? But with you, it doesn't feel like this big revelation. It feels like coming home. I reached for his hand, intertwining our fingers. Maybe that's exactly what it's supposed to feel like. Finals came and went in a blur of study sessions that turned into conversations about everything except schoolwork. Gabriel would catch me looking at him over our textbooks and smile, not the uncertain smile from before, but something warmer, more sure of itself. The real test came when Connor stopped by unannounced one evening in January. Gabriel and I were cooking dinner together, something that had become routine, when the knock came. I saw Gabriel tense slightly as he answered the door. "Hey man, haven't seen you around much since winter break started," Connor said, his eyes immediately finding me in the kitchen. "Oh, hey Carter." "Connor," I nodded, suddenly very aware of how domestic the scene must look. Gabriel and me moving around each other easily, sharing cooking duties like we'd done it forever. "So what's the deal with you two?" Connor asked with that familiar smirk. "Still pretending that party never happened?" Gabriel looked at me, and I saw him make a decision. "Actually, we're dating." The words hung in the air. Connor's expression shifted from amusement to surprise to something like understanding. "Seriously? Since when?" "Since we stopped being idiots about it," Gabriel said, moving to stand beside me. The gesture was small but significant, a public claim, a statement. Connor studied us both for a moment, then broke into a grin. "About damn time. You two were painful to watch." After Connor left, Gabriel seemed lighter somehow. "That felt good," he said, pulling me into his arms. "Scary, but good. You sure you're ready for people to know?" I asked, still hardly believing this was my life now. "I'm ready to stop hiding," he said, pressing his forehead against mine. "I spent so long being afraid of what it meant to want you. I don't want to waste any more time on fear." By February, we'd found our rhythm. Gabriel started therapy to help work through his feelings about his sexuality, and I went with him to a few sessions. It helped, having someone neutral to talk through the complexities of coming out later in life, of questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself. "I think I was always attracted to men," Gabriel told me one night as we lay in his bed, something that had become natural after weeks of careful boundary setting. "I just got really good at ignoring it. Girls were easier to understand, safer to want." "And now?" I asked, tracing patterns on his chest. "Now I know the difference between safe and real," he said, catching my hand and bringing it to his lips. "This is real, Carter. You're real." Spring arrived with an acceptance that felt hard-won. Gabriel joined the campus LGBTQ+ group with me, nervously at first, then with growing confidence. Watching him find his place in that community, seeing him embrace parts of himself he'd spent years suppressing, was beautiful. We had our first real fight in March, about something stupid, dishes or laundry, but underneath it was all the pressure we'd been carrying. We said things we didn't mean, stormed off to separate rooms, and I spent an hour convinced I'd ruined everything. But Gabriel came to find me, and we talked it through like adults, like partners who were committed to making this work. "I love you," he said as we made up, and it wasn't the first time he'd said it, but something about it felt different, more certain. "Not because you're helping me figure myself out, not because you're patient with me. I love you because you're you." "I love you too," I said, admitted in ways I was still discovering. By the time our lease renewal came up in April, the decision was easy. We were staying together, as ourselves. Gabriel updated his social media relationship status without fanfare, started bringing me to family dinners, introduced me to his coworkers as his boyfriend with pride instead of hesitation. 6 months after that first kiss, we were solid. Not perfect. We still had moments of uncertainty, conversations about the future that felt too big, disagreements about small things that mattered more than they should. But we were real, and we were choosing each other every day. "Thank you," Gabriel said one night as we got ready for bed. "For what?" "For seeing me before I saw myself. For being patient while I caught up." I kissed him then, soft and sure, tasting like the future we were building together. Thank you for being worth the wait.